Kind of have to feel bad for airline stocks. They were seeing this nice recovery in late October, early November. The world was slowly reopening. Countries dropped their travel restrictions, only to have all the countries, or not all, but seemingly more and more every day, restoring restrictions because of Omicron.
Yeah, I mean, look, we haven't seen much happen here, but certainly what's happening in Europe and Southern Africa is something to be concerned about.
All right, well, speaking of airlines, the World Aviation Festival is underway, and Bloomberg's Guy Johnson is there for us. Guy, what's happening there?
Tim and Scarlett, I join you from the World Aviation Festival, which is back in person here in London for the first time in 2 years. Airline CEOs gathering to discuss what the recovery is going to look like and the impact that Omicron is having in terms of short-term bookings. In terms of the sense of what is going on that I've derived thus far from my conversations, there is certainly an impact on bookings as a result of Omicron. That is mainly happening in Europe. It doesn't appear to be happening in the same way over in the United States, which feels like a much more insulated market at this point. There has been some impact as well in terms of North Atlantic travel. I think people are waiting to see exactly what the White House is going to do, what the CDC is going to do in terms of rules. The expectation certainly is that we are going to see maybe an increase in testing. We wait, we watch, we'll see what happens. This is an industry that is having to learn to be incredibly flexible in terms of how it runs its operations. But there is a sense of resiliency that has now been built up. There is a sense that with every successive wave, there is an opportunity to recover. And as a result of which, many of the CEOs that I've been talking to certainly feel on the front foot. They're feeling very positive about what the picture is going to look like next year. The challenge really for this industry is that it has been so damaged by COVID, the balance sheets have been so affected, the financials have been so under strain, that the next challenge that this industry faces is going to be incredibly difficult. And the two are definitely related, because the second challenge is the transition to net zero. It's going to be incredibly expensive, and I think certainly the jury still feels like it's out here at this conference as to how easy that is going to be. We know that it is going to be important. We know that it is going to have to happen. How it happens, I think, remains a very open question, particularly for an industry that has been hit so hard by this pandemic. My sense, leaving the conference, is that the industry feels positive, but there is an expectation that it will not be a straight journey, that it will be very bumpy, and that there's going to be significant amounts of turbulence. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Guy. Well, here now with us is Sheila Kayalu, Jefferies Managing Director. She focuses on all things airlines, aerospace, and more. Sheila, thanks for being here. It's great to see you again. We just heard from our colleague Guy Johnson in London at the World Aviation Festival. He said concerns about the Omicron variant already impacting short-term bookings in Europe, more so than here in the U.S. Though, is it just a matter of time before this happens here in the U.S.?
Oh, there's no doubt it's probably already here. These variants are just going to be things that we're going to have to roll with. When we look at the Alpha and the Delta variant, they took 225 to 250 days from the first case to the peak. Vaccinations were ongoing at the time, so it's hard to see the impact of air travel, but there was definitely an impact on the airline share prices where they declined 20%. So, and they're still sort of at trough levels. So we're seeing airline stocks hit on that, the fear of the recovery being, sidestepped. And really one of the biggest drivers of the recovery we're looking to is international travel, which was only about at 35% levels at the end of Q3, slated to go to 65% at the end of Q4. And of course, as you see new restrictions being put into place, that'll hamper that recovery.
So that being the case, Sheila, do you want to be focusing on U.S. domestic airlines, or those that are more concentrated on the domestic market versus those that have exposure to Europe and Asia? Or do you want to go out on a limb here and say, I'm going to look ahead and past the current difficulties and the current turbulence?
So our view was actually quite bullish on the airlines coming out of Q3 earnings, just on that international and that corporate recovery. But you could see both of those stagnate. Medium term, the airlines have other headwinds that are more associated with fuel costs, as fuel was rising, of course, pulled back a little bit, and labor wage inflation that we're seeing pushed through the airlines. So that's a medium term risk, but we thought for the shorter terms, the airlines were quite attractive. And of course, domestic is better positioned with a company like Southwest over the international, more well-rounded carriers. But I would say right now we're going for more of a conglomerate exposure, like a Raytheon Technologies on the manufacturing side that manufactures engines for aircraft and has a defense business as well, as maybe the best ways to play the aerospace recovery for now, because we think it's going to be quite a bumpy ride.
Hey, Sheila, I'm wondering about permanent changes perhaps that we might see when it comes to the way that airlines deal with fees. We've seen a suspension of many cancellation fees and an easier to buy refundable tickets and a suspension of change fees as well. How much is this costing airlines, and should consumers and investors expect these types of changes to continue when we are hopefully sometime soon on the other side of this pandemic?
Good question.
I hope they keep them because I just canceled a flight I had for
same with me.
internationally. I think that, when you have restrictions put into place and, you have UK putting in PCR testing requirements, the administration contemplating a 7-day quarantine, it's really hard to travel and make it easily accessible for folks. So in terms of the fees and how much it's costing airlines, it's the least of their cost bucket concerns at the moment.
Sheila, is there an argument to be made here that the downside in airline stocks is limited because governments will, at the end of the day, backstop them and support them if the virus worsens and if really extreme travel restrictions are put in place and really restrain their ability to operate?
Globally and in the U.S., airlines were significantly supported. So there is obviously a backstop, but a backstop is very different from an attractive financial vehicle that's 5 times levered, right? So I think that there's, it's not the worst case scenario, but, there's puts and takes.
Sheila, finally, you've got buy ratings on Delta and Southwest Airlines. Why are these the companies that are most suited, at least domestically, to handle this turbulent environment?
Well, Southwest on its exposure in the U.S., and we've seen a domestic U.S. recovery, and it was more about their corporate recovery and where they're positioned. On Delta, just a quality name that has been, has exposure to the transatlantic routes that we thought were the next to recover. Of course, that is going to be pulled back a little bit, but just on the quality of their name, their diversity of their portfolio as well.
All right, Sheila Kayalu. Sheila, always great when you join us to talk all things aerospace airlines. Really appreciate you taking the time. Sheila's Jeffries, Managing Director, who covers all things aerospace.